Okay, so after the discussion of the literary genres and subgenres, we move on to our next topic, which is the elements of literary criticism. Again, for the purpose of this discussion, the elements are presented here are not limited to the following, but for the purpose of our discussion and to standardize our discussion, we have chosen 7 literary elements or literary criticism elements. So we have the following. We have the character, theme, plot, point of view, setting, and conflict, which we will discuss in our video for today. Okay, so in continuing our discussion, the first element of our literary criticism will be the character. So the character can be described in two perspectives, but in our definition for today, characters can either be classified into protagonist or antagonist. So protagonist is the center figure in the story, or otherwise known as the hero, while the antagonist is the opposite of the protagonist, the character in opposition of the main character or in opposition of the hero, which is also known usually as the villain. Now, characteristics of a person or a character can be classified into the following. So we can classify a character through physical appearance. What does the character looks like physically? And then the second, what the character thinks, feels, and dreams based on the story or based on the events that unfold in the story. The character, what the character does and does not do in the story, so that can also be used to describe the character, and what others say about the character. So the characteristics of a character can be defined as individual, developing, or static. So individual would be described as unique characteristics of this character, and then developing is how the character evolved throughout the story, and then static is the stereotype of the character. Okay, again, moving on with our discussion. After the first element, we have the theme of the story. So as defined, the theme is the subject of a writing or a person, thoughts on a topic, and then it is also an idea that recurs or pervades a literary work and gives a particular ambience of the story. So based on the definition, a recurring symbol, idea, within the unfolding events of the story will be considered or classified as the theme. So the theme, or in order to identify the theme, we have the following. So number 1, observe and analyze the title, because usually the theme is already embedded in the title of the story. The second, in order to identify the theme, notice the repeating patterns and symbols as mentioned earlier in our definition. So the third one is take note of the details and particulars of the story that gives greater meaning or greater relevance or social relevance of the story, because from this you can already conclude the theme of the story based on the deeper meaning or relevance of the presentation of the story. Okay, the next element of our discussion of the elements of literary criticism will be the plot. So the plot, as defined, is the causal sequence of events. So causal means the cause, the reason why these events happen. So the sequence of these events in that particular order is called the plot. So elements of a plot will be exposition, complication, climax, and resolution. So the exposition is the introductory or introduction of the events. So it contains information needed to understand the story. So this contains the basic fundamental information needed in order to understand the story. The second is the complication. So this is the catalyst or the one initializing the conflict of the story. So this is where the conflict starts in the complication. The climax is the turning point in the story that occurs when the characters resolve the complication. So the climax is not the beginning of the conflict. So the climax is not the beginning of the fight, the argument, the misunderstanding. So the climax is when the complication is already being resolved or going towards resolution that is already considered as the climax of the story. That's why the climax is not necessarily always in the middle of or at the end of the story, or usually they say it's in the middle of the story, but it can also be presented towards the end of the story because of this definition. The fourth one is resolution. So the resolution are events that brings the story to a close, and eventually it is located or presented towards the last chapters or part of the story. So it presents how the story was has ended, and it also presents the solution that was used in order to end the story. The next element in our literary criticism is the setting, which is commonly known as the location where the story unfolded. So conditions of a setting can be in the following. Number one, it is the physical or geographic location. So the description of the area physically is known as the geographical location. The second, conditions of a setting, it can also be in the form of time when the story took place. Specifically, it can be told in the form of a historical period, the time of day, or the year. And then under these conditions of setting, the weather condition can also be considered as part of the setting. Is it rainy, sunny, or stormy? And then the last one, social conditions. What is the daily life of the characters like? It focuses on speech, dress, mannerism, costumes of a particular place. So moving on, the next element is conflict. So as defined, it is usually, so the next element in our literary criticism is the conflict. Conflict is defined as the essence of the story. It can be identified as the following. So the conflict can be between the human versus human, or person versus another person, human versus nature, human versus society, and human versus self. So moving on to the last element of literary criticism, we have resolution. So resolution as defined is the unfolding or solution to a complicated issue in a story. This is also known as the denouement, or this is a French term which means to untie or to unravel. So in the resolution, you will have to present the unraveling of the story based or coming from the previous part of the element, which is conflict. Resolution are usually presented in the final parts or chapters of a story and mostly follows the climax. Okay, so I hope you were able to follow and go through the basic and fundamental parts of literature, and hopefully we can discuss a deeper understanding of a particular literary piece for the purpose of discussing the different literary genres. So again, thank you for following and watching. Please click subscribe so that you will be notified for new videos. Again, this is Doc Ed Padama, and thank you. Hello, thank you for watching this series of this video regarding elements of literary criticism, and I hope this video would be able to help you in your questions regarding criticizing literatures. So I would like to thank you for continually watching and promoting the videos contained in the YouTube channel, and please, again, I would like to request that you support the channel by clicking subscribe and the notification button. So again, thank you and see you on the next video. Bye!